Have you ever wondered what the difference is between Parmesan and Parmigiano Reggiano? Parmigiano Reggiano is the official Italian protected version of the cheese, and Parmesan is the generic knockoff made by a lot of other countries. But is Parmigiano Reggiano really worth twice the price of generic Parmesan? Let's find out. Hey there, cheese historians, I'm Julia and welcome to Cheese History, a channel where we normally talk about the history of cheese and all of its weird and wonderfulness. But today we're going to be comparing authentic Italian Parmigiano Reggiano with generic New Zealand Parmesan, to see if there's really any difference between the two, and to see if it's really worth paying twice the price for the Parmigiano Reggiano compared to the Parmesan. So what we're going to do is we're going to taste both of these cheeses by themselves, and then we're going to toast them on some bread to see how well they grill as another point of comparison, and then we're going to rate them on this tier list. There are 5 tiers in the tier list. The top tier is more cheese please, and this is where all the excellent cheese goes, the type of cheese that makes you say more cheese please. The second tier is great cheese. This is the next level down. It's great cheese. It's not superb, but it's great. The third tier is cheesy, and this is where all the average cheesy cheese goes. The fourth tier is good enough. This is where all the cheese that just makes the cut for being called cheese. And the final tier is, you call that cheese? And this is where all the cheese that doesn't really deserve the title of cheese goes. So that's our tier list. Let's have a look at our 2 cheeses. This one here is the generic Parmesan. This is a New Zealand cheese. There's nothing particularly spectacular about it. It's kind of your average supermarket Parmesan. And this one here is Italian Parmigiano Reggiano. So it's a protected cheese made in Italy to exacting standards and has to meet quite a high criteria in order to be called Parmigiano Reggiano. I have a whole video on the history of Parmesan if you want to check that out to learn more about the protected version of this cheese. So the first thing I've got to do is unwrap these 2 cheeses. So let's do that. So immediately you should be able to see a big difference between the two. This one here, the Parmigiano Reggiano, is in a wedge, right? So it's been cut from a massive wheel of Parmigiano Reggiano, whereas the Parmesan is in a square because it's likely been made in some sort of block, and then either made in a block this size or made in a much bigger block and then cut to a smaller size, because blocks are just much easier to shape and to sell as opposed to wedges. The Parmigiano Reggiano is made in a wheel because that's the traditional shape for cheese. Cheeses have been made in wheels for thousands of years, effectively. So they've kept that tradition alive by keeping the round shape, which means that when you get Parmigiano Reggiano, you almost always get it in a wedge because it's been cut from a wheel. The other interesting thing about the Parmigiano Reggiano is that on the end here we have a small section of the rind of the cheese. This is the outside. It has all these little markings on the edge, there were holes that were poked into the rind of the cheese when after it was made, and they're one of the signs that it was made as Parmigiano Reggiano, and as it's aged those have become a distinctive part of the outer rind. So this is one way of telling that you've got authentic Parmigiano Reggiano, if it has a little bit of the rind with these holes patterns on it. The patterns change depending on what part of the cheese you get. So these are our 2 cheeses, so let's get into the taste test, and let's start with the generic Parmesan. I have this cheese knife to wedge off a chunk of each. So this is the generic Parmesan. It's quite pliable, but it does crack and break like you would expect for Parmesan, so it does steadily crumble away. It doesn't have a lot of flexibility to it. Let's get into the tasting. It has a really strong Parmesan flavor. It's sort of nice and a little bit salty, very savory. There's a lot of depth to it. It's actually quite impressive considering it's a generic New Zealand Parmesan. It has quite a lot of depth to it. It's a strong flavor, it's punchy, it's in your face. There's no denying that it's Parmesan. It's right there, really making its presence felt. Now let's try the Parmigiano Reggiano. So this one you should be able to see is a much lighter colour compared to the New Zealand Parmesan. That could be just simply a difference between New Zealand cows versus Italian cows. It also has quite a lot of pliability to it, but it cracks in a similar sort of way. So let's try this one. That one I would say actually has less immediate flavour, not as strong a flavour as the generic Parmesan. It's a little bit more subtle, not quite as sort of salty and punchy and in your face as the generic Parmesan. The flavor profile is similar. You can see that they're definitely trying to be the same sort of cheese, but on the one hand you've got a very strong, punchy Parmesan, and the other you've got a much subtler, milder Parmigiano Reggiano. I wouldn't say there's necessarily more complexity of flavour in the Parmigiano Reggiano, it's just milder and more subtle. So let's take some of each of these cheeses and put them on some bread and grill it in the oven to see how well they grill. And there we go, here are our 2 pieces of bread ready to go in the oven. We have our generic New Zealand Parmesan and our PDO Parmigiano Reggiano. So here we are. Here are our 2 cheeses toasted on bread. This is the New Zealand Parmesan and this is the Italian Parmigiano Reggiano. As you can see, both of them have melted pretty well. They were just starting to take on a little bit of colour. You can see that particularly up here in the New Zealand Parmesan when I had to pull them out of the oven because the toast was getting a little bit too dark for my liking and I didn't want to burn it because that would throw off the flavours of the cheese a lot. So let's give them a try and let's start with the New Zealand Parmesan. It still has the really nice savoury Parmesan flavour, lots of umami flavours in there. It has mellowed a bit in being melted, so it's not quite as strong and punchier flavour as it was when it was just fresh cut off the block. So now let's try the Italian Parmigiano Reggiano. So just like the New Zealand Parmesan, that one's also a lot milder and subtler now that it's melted. Because it was milder and subtler to start with, it's much milder and subtler. So where would I rate these cheeses on my tier list? Well, for the first time ever, I'm actually going to rate the generic cheese is higher than the protected cheese. And this is down to my personal preference. I like stronger flavored cheeses. I like those strong, slightly acidic, sort of earthy, savory notes of aged cheese like aged cheddar. And this Parmesan really falls nicely into that category. It has a strong, savory flavor that's just like, By comparison, the Parmigiano Reggiano is milder and subtler. And for some people, that will be what makes it a better cheese. But for me, I prefer the stronger flavour of the generic type. I think it just comes through a lot more. So I'm going to put the New Zealand Parmesan in great cheese, because I think it is a great cheese. It's just not quite the next level of like mind-blowingly amazing. But it does have a lot of what I look for in this style of cheese. And I'm going to put the Parmigiano Reggiano in the next tier down in cheesy, because I think it is a good middle-of-the-way cheese. It has a lot of complexity of flavour, it's subtle, it does really well melted, so it would work in any sort of circumstance where you need that kind of Parmesan, umami, savoury flavour. But it's just not quite as strong as its generic counterpart, and for me, that's what makes the difference in this tier list. But this is just my opinion, right? So do let me know in the comments below what you think of Parmigiano Reggiano versus generic Parmesan. Which do you prefer? Do you prefer the stronger cheese or the more subtle one? Is Parmesan a stronger cheese than Parmigiano Reggiano in your part of the world? Because this might be a New Zealand thing as opposed to something that's like this all over the world. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time for more cheese history.